Welcome to the Birth Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Hof, BSN RN. I am a wife, a mother of two, and a nurse specializing in the care of women and newborns. In this podcast, we will share powerful journeys of birth givers with the goals of lifting the veil on the birth experience, healing through sharing, and beginning an open conversation to strengthen trust and promote transparency between birthing people and healthcare providers. In this episode, clinicians will be discussing their knowledge of best practices at the current time and recommendations they have found effective. It is not intended to provide medical advice. Please speak to your medical provider before making any medical decisions. Additionally, it is important to keep in mind that evidence-based practice evolves as our knowledge of science improves. To the best of our ability, we will attempt to present the most current recommendations from the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine at the time that the podcast is recorded, but that may not necessarily reflect the best practices at the time the podcast is heard. Hello! Today I have with me Arya Pretlow. Arya is a certified nurse midwife, an international board-certified lactation consultant, and a certified yoga therapist. She's also in the process of getting her Doctor of Nursing practice, as if all of that other stuff was not enough. Today she's going to talk about when to start pumping and supplements to increase your milk supply. Arya, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Kelly. Thanks for inviting me. So when to start pumping? That is a very individualized answer. There's no cut and paste applies to all. So there are people who have extenuating circumstances for which there is an argument to consider hand expressing but not pumping colostrum during pregnancy. The study that supported this was specifically looking at pregnant people with gestational diabetes because their infants, their newborns, are at a higher risk of neonatal hypoglycemia. And we also know that a baby born to a parent with gestational diabetes has a higher risk of developing diabetes later in life. The study also indicates that newborns that receive formula have a higher risk of developing diabetes later in life. So if the parent wants to try to avoid sort of a double dose of risk, it's not like it doubles the risk, but just wants to limit the things that are increasing their baby's risk of future diabetes. And you can't help it that you have gestational diabetes, but maybe you could do something to at least potentially avoid giving your baby formula if your plan is to feed your baby your own milk. Then at 36 weeks, hand expressing 2 times no more per day and not expecting very much to come out was shown by the study to be able to provide supplementation for that newborn so that the baby didn't need to have formula in order to maintain its blood sugars in the immediate newborn period. The study did not, however, look at pumping specifically, and it didn't look at hand expressing more than 2 times a day. So one of the things that we know about colostrum is it comes out very slowly in tiny quantities, and it's super sticky. So collecting it can be very challenging. And unlike in the postpartum, when you're establishing your milk supply and you have a clear rhythm of hormones that impacts your supply throughout the day, prenatally, you don't necessarily have that same diurnal rhythm yet. So we can't necessarily even say that those early morning times, which are great for pumping to have more stored milk in the postpartum, I can't even say specifically that, like, if you fall into this category of people who maybe it's a good idea to express milk while still pregnant, I can't even tell you specifically what time of day is a good time to do that. So that was the population that was looked at specifically. This is a 2017 study, and we can find it and reference it in the show notes if anybody wants to like super geek out on the studies. And the thing that we also know with any study is that just because it worked for that population and was advisable, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody should do it. most babies don't need to be supplemented immediately after birth. What they need is to sleep and have lots of skin to skin and have 24/7 access to their food source. So I don't encourage everyone, just because they're worried about breastfeeding and initiating breastfeeding, to try to collect and store colostrum while they're still pregnant. I can, however, use that study as at the very least giving me some kind of parameters for, they said 36 or 37 weeks, because at least then you're already in dates, right? I mean, it's better for your baby to gestate longer if it's a normal, healthy pregnancy, but you're not preterm, you're just early term. And we know that like hand expression is the recommendation as opposed to pumping. So with pumping in the postpartum, much depends on, do you need a store of milk because you have to go back to work at 2 weeks, because you have to go back to work right away? Do you need to pump because your baby's in the NICU? Do you need to pump because it alleviates your anxiety about something in the future with your breastfeeding relationship? What is the reason for pumping? And so let's just say the most benign reason for pumping, which is just, like most American parents, I got to go back to work at 6 weeks, which is stupid, but that's how it is. So the challenge there is that, in my experience as a lactation consultant and an L&D nurse and a certified nurse midwife, it takes about 6 weeks until a newborn is what I call reliably good at latching most of the time and having a good feed. They have a pretty steep learning curve. And if you are a first-time lactator, you also have a pretty steep learning curve. And so
Thank you for saying that.
Putting the two learnings together is like a hot mess for most people. It just, you feel like you're in the middle of chaos, and there's really high stakes. And so I understand that can feel like, oh my God, especially if your baby is like less than 2 weeks old and you're like, it's just going to be like this for 6 weeks. And my answer to that is no, it should not be like that for 6 weeks. It should be getting better and better and better. But still, even around 2 or 3 weeks, I feel like so many times people are like, I'm pretty sure we've got this. The baby's doing great. And literally the next feed, the baby is like, I haven't do anything, and they're like bouncing around and like the parent is just like, what happened? Like, you just had, I was so excited. I thought we were over the hump. And now it's like, nobody knows what they're doing anymore. And because it's a newborn and they don't remember. They're in training. And so by about 6 weeks, they often have enough suckling hours to be at like an amateur, right? An amateur nearing the pro level for breastfeeding. Also, I'm just going to use the term breastfeeding. You may be body feeding, you may be chest feeding. I get that. I honor that. I hear you. For ease of language, so I don't have to say all those three things every time, I'm just going to call it breastfeeding. So you got to go back to work at 6 weeks. Generally, a couple of weeks before you need to go back to work, you might consider starting to pump. All you really need is however much milk your baby is going to eat the next day. And so, or to pump the number of times that your baby would be directly breastfeeding if you were together, right? So if you have an 8-hour workday and your baby, you're feeding on cue, and let's say outside of a growth spurt, your baby eats every 2 to 3 hours, like one would expect any newborn. Obviously, it could be from every 30 minutes for some spurts, to occasionally they sleep for 3 or 4 hours, but every 2-ish to 3-ish hours. Then, every day at work, you need to pump every 2 to 3 hours to maintain your supply. But that doesn't mean that leading up to that first day separated from your baby, that you have to somehow feed your baby on demand and also pump every 2 to 3 hours, because not only will that exhaust you, it will also likely lead to hyperlactation, oversupply. And if you if you're a person who's concerned about having adequate supply because of stories you've heard or a physical history that increases your risk for that, I know that it can sound appealing and kind of like, I mean, I feel like having too much milk isn't a horrible thing, but actually it is physiologically not only inconvenient, but increases your risk for inflammatory mastitis, which increases your risk for all of the sequela of infection. So I don't recommend doing things that lead to hypersupply. So if you were to just pump once or twice a day at the beginning, or even just once a day, but every day for the 2 weeks leading up to that first day you're gone, you're gonna have a little stash to get you through the first day. People hear the stories about like, I got a freezer full of milk, and okay, but do you need a freezer full of milk? Like
And what if your electricity goes out?
All that milk is
Do you
gone.
want to lose all that work?
Are you pregnant and planning a hospital birth? You don't need a birth plan. You need a birth vision. In my opinion, birth plans set you up for failure. Yep, I said it. Hear me out before you turn off this podcast. You may think that by downloading a generic birth plan, it means you're in control. The truth is, it's not that simple. No one can control exactly how their birth will go. There are way too many variables. What every pregnant person wants is to walk into the hospital pregnant and to walk out with a healthy newborn in their arms. The journey in between is the murky part. It's hard to know what issues might come up that need to be addressed. If you focus your energy on a birth vision rather than giving your power to a birth plan, you can empower yourself to make the best choices for you and your baby. That's why you need to get into my Empowered Hospital Birth program. As a labor nurse and mindset coach, I can help guide you through the process of maintaining the calm autonomy that will help you achieve the birth vision you desire. In my Empowered Hospital Birth program, I will help you identify the source of anxiety you have surrounding hospital birth, fill in knowledge gaps to make sure that you are fully informed and confident, learn key phrases so you can better communicate with your medical team, emotionally process your fears so that they don't hold power over you. Go to kellyhof.com/empowered to book a free 30-minute private birth vision call, where we will identify your top fears and must-haves and gain clarity on exactly how you want to feel in the birth space. That's kellyhof.com/empowered. I'm honored to be a part of your birth journey.
Right? I mean, it's like, so it is a thing that seems to help some people manage their general anxiety about feeding their baby. However, I also see that increased work and increased monitoring and increased logging and tracking and just data collection of how many ounces and why are my ounces down and what's happening, that doesn't help anxiety, not one bit. And so my recommendation is very, very client specific because it just depends on the person in front of me. I absolutely do not recommend starting pumping before lactation is well established and really direct breastfeeding is well established. The baby is not messing up your nipples. The baby is pretty good at latching deeply most of the time and seems to be able to feed consistently with a suck, suck, swallow kind of pattern until they are satiated. And then also don't pump if you don't need to. Meaning if you're not going to be separated from your baby, you don't need to pump and give yourself another extra job. I think sometimes people think it will decrease a job for them because it's like, but then someone else can feed the baby. But when that baby is getting that bottle feeding or cup feeding or however you're getting that milk, your breasts still need stimulation. And so instead of directly breastfeeding, you're still going to have to pump. And so you still have to wake up or you still have to do something to maintain your supply and protect the health of your breasts. So, I mean, if you need it for like a mental health break from all the things involved with breastfeeding, you're like, I'm just going to pump. I'm going to go back to sleep. Okay. But if it's just like, I just want to pump but I don't need to pump, and I also have plans to continue direct breastfeeding, then sometimes the work for the IBCLC is helping that person assess those goals and be like, but which one is your bigger goal? Because pumping increases the risk of inflammatory mastitis. It just does. And so if we don't need to do it, it is better to avoid it. If you need to do it, you should not feel bad about doing it by any means. It is a way to efficiently extract the milk from both breasts so that you can maintain your supply when you're separated from your baby. This is what millions of us do and have to do. But it isn't like you don't get extra credit. It's not, there's no bonus points. There's no benefit to, there's no nothing. There's not even like a cookie or a sticker.
Gosh.
There's literally no benefit if you do not need to do it because you will be separated from your baby. And so if you have date night, you might be like 2 times in the week leading up to date night, I'm going to pump and store that milk so that grandma, the babysitter, auntie, whoever can feed the baby while I am out enjoying my partner's company. Fabulous. But you don't need to pump on the regular to prepare for that. You don't have to have milk you pumped 3 months ago and that's been, in the freezer just waiting for this opportunity. You could just plan ahead a little bit and see how that works.
Awesome.
I'm relatively sure this will not be a popular answer, but that is my answer.
Well, but honestly, I don't know why it wouldn't be a popular answer, because you're freeing a lot of moms from that stress. You're like releasing that for them. And that's huge. I wish somebody had told me that, because I was that crazy person that pumped at 37 weeks. And I thought I was going to go into labor because I pumped at 37 weeks because I was tired of being pregnant. And of course I didn't, but I had 8 ounces of colostrum that I brought to the hospital with me.
What? Just in case? Just in case?
My daughter did not lose much weight. Let me just tell you.
Fine.
But I don't know if it really helped.
I bet.
But in my head, I was like, I don't want to feed formula, but if we're having trouble nursing, then I can pump and keep my milk supply and give her the colostrum. I don't know. It was very misguided. I did not do it the second time. The second time I hand expressed. So I not at 37 weeks. I hand expressed because my baby was slow to latch. Both of them. That first 24 hours didn't really know what to do. And so with my second, I let him just kind of lick it off the breast. And I would be like, I would tell my nurse, he had 300 drops of breast milk.
I counted them. 1, 2,
he had 247 drops this feed. Yeah. So
oh my gosh. I'll tell you something though, like the thing about the like slow to latch is that that's normal newborn behavior in the first 24 hours. And so there's also this tendency, because if you have a baby in the hospital, and I'm not knocking that, this is the norm for most Americans, right? But if you have the baby in the hospital has metrics. Yeah. And also the hospital, in order to meet those metrics, which is just data collection, like basic things like making sure you're both safe and stable. Like these are important metrics. And also it interrupts your flow and your day. Also, there are probably visitors who are sitting there watching a football game half the time. And you're like, I kind of want to feed my baby, but I don't feel like get my boob out in front of my brother-in-law or whatever. And so the baby is born under normal circumstances with a bonus stash in itself. It's not born hungry. It's not crying because it's hungry. It's crying because all of its senses are suddenly being stimulated with so much more stuff, right? Yeah. And so just all the snuggling and all the skin to skin and keeping the baby safe and warm and near the breast, technically, again, for a healthy full-term baby, is fine for the first day of life. And also, that doesn't mean swaddle the baby, set it in the crib, and be like, okay, every 3 hours I will offer you the breast, and then be offended that you didn't take it. Or be like, you're hard to wake up. I'm like, the baby's not hard to wake up. The baby is, now the baby probably is a little bit hungry. And also like it's been left over to the side, and what it expects is to come out of the inside of your body and to rest on the outside of your body. for the
Yeah.
foreseeable future. I'm sorry to
Right.
say.
Let me just tell you that this is why I kicked my husband out and was just like, I'm hanging out with my baby. I was like, dude, go home, be you. I don't need you. You don't need to be here. No one needs to be here. It's just me and my baby. And going back to the parameters. So hospital, obviously, was all of my experience in the whole birth process because I was a postpartum nurse with my first and I was a labor and delivery nurse with my second. And I had the parameters stuck in my brain. And I was really, really trying with the gold lactation conferences that I attended and all of that to really understand the best way to do it. But I'm not an IBCLC. So I just kind of scraped the surface when I'm learning all these things. And so I think that even with all my knowledge, there was so much that was misguided. And when we take those hospital parameters and apply them to mothers, which has to happen because that's the only way, like you said, to keep people safe and to make sure that the baby's not losing too much weight and all that. For someone like me, that causes a little bit of anxiety and perfectionism and all those things. And so hence I must pump at 37 weeks to make sure that my baby doesn't get formula and the 247 drops this feed. And I'm not alone. I am not alone in this perfectionism. And I just want mothers to know that do what you need to do to feed your baby. Let people help you. You're doing great. There are lots of ways to do it, but your job is to cuddle and feed. The soapbox put away. So if for some reason you feel like your supply, once you've established breastfeeding, if your supply starts to go down, and we could do a whole other episode about what causes your supply to go down, probably going to be necessary. A lot of mothers feel the need to find supplements to help them increase their milk supply. Now, I want to throw a plug in for lactation cookies, because if you need an excuse to have delicious lactation cookies, I'm not taking that away from you because they're delicious. There's something about throwing brewer's yeast and oatmeal into a chocolate chip cookie that just makes it spectacular. I don't know. My husband even ate them.
It's interesting because I think in our world of working with peripartum people, we're like lactation cookie, lactation cookie, lactation. And people for whom lactation is a new word and like they still have trouble saying breast at all, let alone breastfeeding. I had an encounter with someone who was really like, oh, no, I don't think we're going to need those. I think it'll be okay. Okay. Like, yeah, I'm not saying go eat the cookies. It's just an idea. Well, it turned out it was because they thought the lactation cookies were made with human milk.
Are you serious?
I am. So it occurred to me that sometimes maybe we have to say like, lactation cookies are intended to support your milk supply.
Right.
They can be made vegan. It wasn't a thing that had ever occurred to me. So I was like, it was one of those things where it takes you a minute, right? Because you're like, again, we're so familiar with them. And I was like,
right.
Yeah, it was very, very educational and helped me kind of be like, all right, yeah, I gotta figure something out about that. Yes, to lactation cookies. If you enjoy them, eat the cookies. The thing is in lactation, you need approximately 500 more calories a day than what you need for like your basal metabolic rate. And so that's a meal, right? Whereas in pregnancy, it's only maybe about 200 calories, which is like 2 hard-boiled eggs. Okay. Yeah. So people in pregnancy are like, yum, yum, yum. And then postpartum, they're like, I'm hardly eating. I want to lose the weight. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
You need, first of all, you're healing. First of all, you're replenishing all of your vitamins and minerals and, and also trying to keep a newborn alive. Like you gotta eat and sleep.
Yeah.
So breastfeeding is hungry, thirsty work. It takes a lot of energy. That being said, don't do it in order to lose weight. Like let's put that whole thing off to the side and just not even go there because bull. But in the end, the thing that will improve your supply is regular, consistent, effective breastfeeding.
Yep.
I'm making a face right now. I realize the audience can't see. So
there are herbs. One of the things I love, I do a lot of things with herbs in my practice, but I'm also studying them in addition because can't stop, won't stop. I know.
Right.
But the thing about herbs, which continues to be true, is, there are different ways of knowing. Okay. And so in medicine, we really love to have random controlled trials. We want RCTs that say, this is a thing and we know that it works. And here's how we know. We tested it randomly on all these people compared to a control, and it showed this. Herbs don't have that. Yeah. And they probably never will. But you know what herbs have that modern medicine doesn't have is hundreds of years of anecdotal evidence that it probably isn't going to kill you and it might work. Mm-hmm. And in some herbs that they do work, right? So, you might have like a case study, or you might have like a retrospective study of 5 people, and all of that adds up. But scientifically, this is the challenge always in medicine of like, I want to recommend herbs, and I also have to say that I can't make the same claims about them that I may be able to make about other things because we don't have the studies that show with the same vigor, I guess you could say.
Well, there's also dosing,
their efficacy.
Like how much of the herb and all of that,
Yes. Like, where was it grown? How is it processed?
Right.
Honestly, if you're buying capsules, is that even what's in that? Because that's also the other thing we run into is like, I don't want you to come back and be like, you told me, and then you went and bought whatever at wherever, and it also had, I don't even know what in it, right? So it either didn't have what you thought it had, or it had extra stuff.
Or it had nothing.
Right? Like, I don't know. It was actually just grass, it's like,
Fair.
So this is the thing. The caveat is always work with someone who actually knows their herbs and understands use of herbs in general, but also particularly in the perinatal period. And also, and I say perinatal, not just prenatal, right? Like all around the childbearing years. And then you have to have a source that is, if it's trusted by the professionals, that's a good sign. If it's, abcherbs.com wrote this, I'm making up a name. Yeah. I really hope that's not a real thing.
Please don't go to
abcherbs.com wrote a blog post that said everyone should take this supplement, make more milk supplement. They're trying to sell you something. Don't trust it. Because unless it's third party verified, it's just their word that, yep, that's what this is. And here's what it does. So all of that being said, all the caveats, here's what we know. And I start out with the protocols, which everyone can access on bfmed.org, is the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. And you can go to resources and you can read all of the protocols. What'd you say?
It's a real website. That's a real website.
This is a real website. Yes. This is a professional website. This is real. And they list all of the protocols that guide the practice for everyone who works in breastfeeding medicine. And so they have a whole protocol number 9, use of galactagogues. And the basic, the TLDR thing is like, if they don't have a good supply, the first step is to figure out why. And I didn't mean to make that rhyme. But if it helps people remember, that's good, right? Because it's like, okay, my supply is down. Well, why do you say that? How did you come to that determination? Has your baby lost weight or isn't gaining weight well, or is their poop weird, or like what's going on that makes you concerned about supply? And what is the feeding like? How is the latch? Like there's a lot that as a healthcare provider, I need to assess before I'm like, yeah, all that's left is for you to take fenugreek. Like, no. Right? I'm not going to tell you to take fenugreek if your baby can't even latch properly. I'm not going to tell you to take fenugreek if you're only feeding every 6 hours. Like none of that makes sense. It requires demand of suckling to send the chemical messages through your body to increase your supply. It is not supply and demand. It's demand and supply. It's demand and supply. We are not scaling up before we even have clientele. We, right? Like that's bass backwards in business and it's bass backwards in breastfeeding. You need to, the baby is putting in their order for tomorrow's supply, really like maybe like 2-3 days away. Right.
Yeah.
So that part is key, like is the basic structure of the breastfeeding physiology in place? Is there something going on that already puts them at risk for low supply? And that could be a history of polycystic ovary syndrome. Like there's a lot of things we could, decrease glandular tissue. There's a lot of things that could be endocrinological or developmental that could, if it had been identified prenatally, it could have prepared that person for the possibility they would have a low supply and a whole plan could have been made. If we're already in the situation where someone is like, I have low supply and we've looked at all of the things and everything is good, we don't really know why. And we've tried like, this is where an intervention of strategic pumping can increase the demand to increase the supply, right? Baby's doing all the things they can do. You can't make a baby that's not hungry eat. Right. So if the baby is like, I am breastfeeding to my level of contentment, I'm great, then a pump can help. Or really hand expression is better than pumping for this use to increase stimulation. So you make more milk. Then we can look at things like, there's a few things, but the ones that we actually have some studies on are fenugreek and silymarin. Silymarin is a component of milk thistle. And so it just happens to be another one that has been studied. But if you look in this protocol and you scroll, it tells you about like, here are things that we can prescribe. And then here's a couple of herbs. And the herbs, when it comes down to like effects on lactation, they're both either insufficient evidence or inconclusive. One of them even says it's likely a significant placebo effect. Like you could take fenugreek. We don't know if fenugreek is why your supply increased. It could be that you're sitting down and relaxing while you drink this tea. And what you needed was to sit down and relax and chill out. Because also if you have a huge amount of stress, those hormones are going to impact your supply because your body is like, oh crap, we don't have time to do this right now. Ugh. And so it's like downregulate. We can't run away with these giant boobs. We need to decrease supply to manage this. Which anyone who's ever breastfeed, you're just like, how does that happen? How did they get like that?
Suddenly I've got 2 torpedoes when I was an A.
Right, totally. Like, what? Exactly. And the other one, the silymarin, which I'm not even sure I'm actually pronouncing it correctly, but that's what it looks like to me. It says inconclusive, possible increase in milk secretion in the short term. Mm-hmm. What we also know is that neither one of them are shown to cause any harm. There's one potential. There was a study. I remember when I was on the floor as a lactation consultant back in the day with you, and there had been a recent. Everybody was so excited about fenugreek, and they were constantly asking us about it. And a recent study had come out that was like, the thing is, we were like, oh no, don't take away the fenugreek. The thing is it can make the baby smell kind of like maple syrup. And there is a metabolic disorder called maple syrup urine syndrome, or I forget the whole name of it, right? Where it's like, that is not something you want to accidentally think your baby has. Like that's awful. And so we, as an office, we're like, we can't keep talking about fenugreek because we're going to like put these infants at risk of being assessed for something they don't have. So
yeah. It makes your urine smell like that too.
Right? It's
makes everything smell
yeah.
like
that. It makes a lot of things smell a lot of ways. So other herbs that have been used for generations include, but are not limited to, so fenugreek, goat's rue, milk thistle, oats, cookies, dandelion, millet, seaweed, anise, basil, blessed thistle, fennel seeds, marshmallow, which like the herb, not Stay Puft, not marshmallows.
Don't start making s'mores.
Right? Moringa leaf, shatavari, and torbangan. What all of that means is that every culture has some kind of herb that they have used for generations to help supply. So Might they work? They might. Will the stress of fitting in another thing you got to do that still is not actually providing more stimulation possibly cancel out the potential benefit of taking any of those things? Yes. However, if making 3 cups of tea a day and sitting down quietly and enjoying them decreases your stress and potentially increases your supply also because maybe the herbs do work, I am all for that. I suspect it has more to do with the decrease in stress and the sitting down to rest, but I also don't care. Like, if you want to get the milk maker tea,
yeah, live your life.
The thing, I mean, right? I'm like, it's not going to hurt you, but you have to brew it properly. So I come across this all the time. People are like, chamomile tea is dumb. I'm like, chamomile tea is not dumb. Thank you very much. How are you brewing it? They're like, just like my Earl Grey for 3 minutes in boiling water. And I'm like, well, that's why it doesn't work. You just made super gross water. Like you made underbrewed chamomile tea. That's disgusting water is what you just made. So to properly brew an herbal tea, it's actually called a tisane. There's a whole process. You have to boil the water, right? Of course. And then you need to steep it in only 6 to 8 ounces of water. Don't be filling up your mug that's like 12 ounces and then wonder why it's gross and not working. 6 to 8 ounces. And then cover it and let it steep for closer to 15 minutes. It really needs to be like 12 to 15 minutes. It varies depending on the herb because some herbs release their phytonutrients more readily than others, but you want to capture all of the volatile compounds that are being released in the steam so that it just drips back in, right? Think about like when the steam gathers, you're capturing all of that. That is the tea that you drink. So what I advise people, whether they're using chamomile as part of like managing anxiety, right? Or because it's something that can help with breastfeeding, just one time a day, make yourself get a good source of chamomile tea. It's better if you get it in bulk. It's likely to be more active. And it should say, I want to say it's a teaspoon to like 6 to 8 ounces. I can look that up, and just go ahead and make yourself your 3 or 4 servings. Because the other thing is 1 serving is not adequate to function medicinally.
Yeah.
Maybe for something like ginger tea for gas, right? Okay. That's going to work pretty quickly. Gas usually isn't something that's like, this is just a forever. Like maybe stop eating dairy if you've got that much gas. Like there's something causing that. It's not normal. But something that's like, I have ongoing anxiety, I have ongoing insomnia, I have ongoing just whatever, then if you're going to use it medicinally, you have to actually prepare it medicinally. And that's its own process. So the other thing is like oats, you can get tinctures, you can make oatmeal, you can make cookies. What I can't tell you is precisely how much to consume. I would say more if it's oatmeal, less if it's cookies because of the sugar.
Really?
Although, I know. But like a cup of cooked oatmeal is way more oats than a cookie, right? So like, what's the dose? I don't know the dose. I don't know.
Brewer's what's the dose yeast. Of happiness there?
What is so I feel like that's an important question. That is, recently I discovered my new favorite ICD-10 code. So if anyone who's listening is not familiar with an ICD-10 code, this is what your provider has to write down for your diagnoses. This is what insurance wants in order to like pay us for our job. And hold on, I gotta find. There's this new one. I have this whole list of like my favorites. And I'm not going to be able to find it. Hold on. ICD. It's like lack of relaxation. I'm not kidding.
That sounds like a nursing
new code.
Nursing.
It does, doesn't it?
Diagnosis.
ICD-10 code Z73.2. Lack of relaxation and leisure.
Oh, that's feel like
all of us.
That's everyone.
That's everyone, right? Yeah. Like, yeah. So anyway, that was kind of a sideways.
Well, that's a really good
little
reason
tour
to
with
have a
me.
low supply. That's why when we go back to work,
Yes.
our supply tanks. It's not, I mean, maybe it's
Correct.
because we're away from our baby and using a mechanical pump, but also that stress isn't helping.
Correct. Yeah. And it's, of course, asinine and exasperating as a new parent, even if you already have kids, but like a parent of a newborn, for someone to come up in, rolling in and being like, can you sleep more? And you're like, what do you think? Like, don't you think I would be if I could? Like, I would love to sleep more. My child doesn't understand the meaning of the word. So and yet sleep is the number one intervention for postpartum mood disorder and stress and like all the things, because if you're not sleeping, nothing works right. And so it is, I know it's super annoying, and also it is like the keystone of health. It's what holds up the whole damn arch.
Yeah.
Is like, but are you sleeping? Are you sleeping enough to not have like an actual psychotic break? Are you like, that's the worst case scenario. And everything leading up to that is annoying and quality of life. But there is a point at which like that's the risk of not sleeping adequately especially in the postpartum period. Well, that's important.
Yeah.
So sleep, I'm super sorry, is always going to come up. It's always going to come up, even though it infuriates everyone. It does.
Yeah. So I think everything that you have said today points to the reason that it is good to have support from a lactation consultant who can help you work through all of these problems that might be causing your supply to go down, might be causing your baby to not nurse well, might be causing painful nursing, might be causing all the things. So if anyone listening to this podcast wants to have a lactation resource, where would you like to send them?
Ooh, okay. So you can find a lactation consultant near you by going to let me find the website. USLCA has one. I feel like ILCA has that too.
I remember being very frustrated at finding a lactation consultant with my first, and I kind of just talked to you with my second. It's like text Arya.
Yeah, text Arya. Dear Arya, what the fuck? Well, what it is.
Exactly. And I was like, oh, I knew all those things. I just forgot to think of them.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot. And I think especially when you're in the weeds, it's like, I don't know. It's just so much to keep track of. And I mean, I was already a trained midwife and had quite a bit of lactation education. And still I was calling all my friends. I was like, you need to come and help me.
Yes. Could you hold this baby up for me?
Like, why doesn't she like my right side? Oh, here we go. So finding a lactation consultant, there are our professional organizations, and the websites are good places to start. So there's ILCA, International Lactation Consultant Association. And I just put it in Google myself, if you put ILCA, find a lactation consultant, it's going to send you right to the page where you can put in your zip code and like within how many miles of this zip code am I willing to travel. So that is one. And also United States Lactation Consultant Association has a Find an IBCLC directory. The thing to know about them is, just as with other kinds of providers, it's only going to list its actual members. And so not all IBCLCs are necessarily members of both of these organizations. Another place to look is, especially if you have a baby-friendly hospital or just a hospital near you, they may have lactation consultants on staff. Pediatrician's office might have one on staff. And the Leche League is great for having peer support and therefore resources. They might also have like, these are the local IBCLCs. And another thing you might consider is also your local WIC office. So the Women, Infants, and Children program gives a lot of support for people who qualify for breastfeeding. But because of that, often they also know the places or the people. They know the helpers. They know the helpers for you to get in touch with if you need some extra support, even if you aren't a WIC member. So those are some things that I can think of off the top of my head. There are tons of books. Always with books, the trick is, even if the book just came out this year, for example, if there's a new book that came out this year all about breastfeeding, it is not going to have the most recent up-to-date Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine protocols, for example. So it might still be telling you to do things about mastitis that we do not do anymore because the research for the book was completed before the research was published about changes to the guidelines. So that's the only tricky part about books, is sometimes it's more dated. But as far as finding a professional, part of our professional responsibility is to stay up on the information, the latest science, and what the evidence-based recommendations are. So those are some resources for finding help with breastfeeding. Another one is Postpartum Support International. It's PSI. Yeah, it's more about mental health, but because there's so much interaction between feeding our babies
And mental health.
and our mental health in either direction, which could be its own episode of the podcast. They're not going to necessarily have, recommendations for lactation consultants, but just another place where it's like, why is everything so hard?
Yes.
And they're like, oh, there could be many reasons. Would you like to join a peer support group? And
Correct.
The answer is yes, please, and thank you.
Yeah. Because everything is so hard. Because everything is new.
Yes. Yeah.
And everything changes. That's another episode. That's a frustration. I'm not even a new mom anymore, but just as a perinatal nurse, I am constantly frustrated by all the new recommendations because everybody's just trying their best. So,
Yes. Yeah, that comes up with me a lot. Just recently, someone was like, hey, a client is asking. So we have CLCs, which are certified lactation coaches, that are like our initial layer of support for most people. Just need, kind of like in the hospital, most people just need a well-trained postpartum nurse. They don't need the lactation consultant to come, right? So we have CLCs, and I got a message from one that was like, what pacifier do we recommend, if any? She's like, I just don't know much about the different ones out there. And I was like, precisely because there are so many out there. First of all, I don't recommend pacifiers, period, dot. But if they want to use one, I also don't have a recommendation because there are so many, and it totally depends on what your baby likes. It's sort of like which baby carrier, the one your baby will be carried in. Like, it needs to be comfortable for you, and your baby needs to accept it. And they have ideas, right? They do. It's like, what cat carrier? I don't know. You better try your cat in that before you invest, because it's going to have ideas. Yeah. So pacifiers, or what bottle, like what shape bottle nipple, like there are so many all the time, new ones. And my expertise is not in bottle feeding. It is actually in breastfeeding. So I'm not really helpful there. I feel like the new 50 million different pumps on the market all the time, right? Where again, It's like, how do you feel about the blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, which one is that? I'm going to have to go look at its specs and see, because there's no way I could possibly keep up on all of the pumps.
Yeah.
Yes. I often am looking things up as people are talking to me and being like, let me see what I can figure out.
Couple questions. You brought up two things, and we can make this a whole other episode if it's going to take too long, or we can mini address it now. So let's just go back to the most recent one, pacifiers. Okay. There's so many changes all the time on whether or not you should use pacifier. From a nursing perspective, I hear a lot of pacifiers decrease the rate of SIDS by 90 blah, blah, blah %. The other thing is that I've been hearing, even from some lactation consultants, that pacifiers aren't necessarily the problem. Nipple flow is the problem. So the pacifier may not cause the nipple confusion, but the confusion may come from the bottle nipple flowing faster than the breast nipple. Yeah. So thoughts on pacifiers?
Okay, so pacifiers. Pacifiers are considered an important part of the safety plan for a NICU baby, for example, right? Because they cannot be with their parent, and babies do require suckling. They do. And suckling is part of what helps them regulate, from my understanding with the NICU babies, their breathing and their heart rate and these things that a full-term healthy infant is doing by being in physical proximity to its parent. Does it still have a very strong urge and honestly need to suckle? Yes. And does that sometimes outpace the parent's comfort or on any level? Yes. So I think that the main thing is, once breastfeeding is well established, which we talked about earlier, if it does not interfere with your baby's latch, and it is something that is providing you with some space, mentally or physically, and that is necessary for your well-being, then what remains is information that I am not super duper up on, but I do have a fairly broad exposure to, which is, what is it doing to your baby's jaw development? Like if you talk to pediatric dentists, they're gonna have ideas about pacifiers because they see what happens down the line based on different kinds of pacifiers or just pacifiers at all. The other thing is, it ends up being a thing that it's another thing you have to keep track of. It's another thing you have to keep clean. It's another thing you have to figure out how to dispose of, or to even just wean your baby off of at some point. So sometimes just that forward thought of like, what do we do later? And is it worth the little bit of respite it might cause me now? And if your answer is, it is so worth it, then okay, every parent has to figure out how to parent. But babies, especially newer babies, don't breastfeed as often if they have pacifiers. And that is a problem. So then milk supply decreases, baby's weight gain isn't as good. They are building hours sucking on nothing and not building hours becoming better at breastfeeding.
Okay. That's fair.
And
so there are pros and cons.
And like wait till breastfeeding is well established.
And your baby and the family has to decide if this works for them. There's always pros and cons.
Yes, very much so.
So the other thing I was going to ask you about was, you mentioned mastitis, and I believe we talked about the pumping more. Was that it?
Pumping less. So it's actually recommended not to pump if you have inflammatory mastitis.
Because it increases the milk supply?
It increases swelling. Basically all the things that we were taught of like massage and put your toothbrush and, pump, and this idea that you're going to like pull the plug out of that plug is swollen tissue. You cannot pull it out. It is swollen tissue.
It's not plugged, it's inflamed.
Exactly. And so we need to treat inflammation, local and systemic. And because pumps aren't as good as baby mouths, feed on demand, but don't pump to try to drain the breast, because that increases demand, thereby increasing supply, thereby increasing the swelling and causing it to continue and possibly get worse, especially depending on what caused the inflammation in the first place.
Love it.
And all of this is separate from like, yes, between days 3 and 5, everyone gets engorged. That's what happens when, like, at that stage of milk production.
But that's not mastitis.
Not talking about that time. But even then, don't pump. But because it's going to make it worse. So it's like ice and rest and feed on demand and hand express to comfort if needed, and take ibuprofen. Love it.
That was really straightforward.
It really is.
But we can do a longer one sometime.
Okay, cool.
There's one episode that I have where her doula came over, she said, and milked her like a cow. Now, but that is what you said. You said hand express, and she was having difficulty doing that. And so then her doula came over and did that for her, because she had a fever and she had extreme pain. And she said that it felt better after that. And I was like, listen, if you got a doula that's going to come milk you, go for it, girlfriend.
Yes, because sometimes people who are trained know how to do it more effectively than people who are new to it. Yeah. And you're like, oh, I can actually help you with that. Yeah. Hand expression, excellent, and does not increase the risk of mastitis.
Love it.
It's pumps, man. They're like a necessary evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Arya, thank you so much for joining me. It's always so much fun to have conversations with you. And I have to cut out the majority of them because we goof around so much. And
It has been very fun, for sure.
yeah,
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure. And I just really appreciate having an opportunity to share this information with the people.
Do you have questions that you wish a labor nurse could answer? As your due date approaches, do you wish you could pick someone's brain about all the things that might happen during your labor? When you meet with your OB or midwife, do you forget your questions in the moment? Do you feel like you need someone to take more time to walk you through what might happen in the hospital and how to truly mentally prepare? You're in luck because I'm offering this as a free service in 2023. To get details on how to schedule a free session with me, email me at birthjourneysrn@gmail.com. Thank you so much for tuning into my podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Don't forget to share the podcast with a friend who can benefit from the valuable insights that we share here. And if you could take a moment to leave a 5-star rating and review, it would mean the world to me. If you're ready to work one-on-one with me to embark on a transformational journey towards a confident and empowered hospital birth experience, go to kellyhof.com/empowered and enroll in my Empowered Hospital Birth Coaching Program. Together, we'll create a roadmap to a birth experience that you'll cherish forever. That's KELLYHOF.com/empowered. Let's make your birth experience extraordinary.